I got an email from somebody saying that her and her entire family were haunted by a mimic that looked exactly like what she would look like in the future if she continued to harm herself. It does mention that she self-harms, but it doesn't go into detail or anything. But if you don't want to hear that, then please scroll. So Jerica had been recently engaging in self-harm, and she got the idea from a friend. So Jerica is 12 years old at the time, and she's sharing a twin bed with her 6-year-old sister in a tiny little single-wide trailer home. Now, nothing spooky had ever happened in this house, but one night she went to sleep and she woke up because she heard somebody in complete frantics. They were like murmuring / whispering what they were frantically saying, and she just listened for a minute while pretending to be asleep until she finally heard what they were saying clearly. Whatever it was in her room said something along the lines of, if your friend was going to jump off a bridge, would you follow her? So she sits up in bed as soon as she hears this, and she looks over, and 2 feet away from her at most is this girl standing in front of her. She was very pale with straggly strawberry blonde long hair. At this point, this woman or whoever it was starts screaming something at Jerica, but Jerica can't hear what she's saying. She said that she could hear her screaming a little bit, but it sounded like the volume was on very low, but she just looks absolutely frantic. But as soon as she realized that Jerica could see her, she looked utterly shocked and she just stopped, went completely silent. But Jerica was shocked too for a couple different reasons. 1, she could see through her. 2, she was floating. And 3, she was wearing the same family heirloom nightgown that Jerica was wearing. And 4, she looked exactly like Jerica, except for she was emaciated and looked disheveled and sickly, and she looked older than Jerica. Jerica said that immediately in her head, she was like, this looks like the future me if I keep down the path I'm going. Well, as soon as she sees that Jerica sees her, she just fades away. Well, at this point, Jerica is like, there's no way that this just happened. This was just a weird dream. So she pulls her covers over her head and she goes back to sleep. But it gets creepier. In the morning, her and her mom are getting ready in the same bathroom, and she can just tell that there's something off about her mom. So she asks her mom, what's wrong? And her mom is like, yeah, you would not believe me even if you tried. So Jerica says, try me. And her mom looks over at her and goes, you were in my room last night. So Jerica just starts shaking her head. No. And this is when her mom proceeds to tell her what happened that night. So her mom says that the night before, she's sleeping in the middle of the night and she feels somebody nudging her from the side of the bed, and she thinks that it's her kid, so she just ignores it. But that's when her mom realizes that neither of them are tall enough to be nudging her from the inside of the bed unless their bodies were pressed up against like the side of the bed, and she would have felt that. She looks above her and she sees a woman floating horizontally above her in a white silk dress. Jerica just cuts her off and she just describes the rest of the dress to her. She was like, it had these little flowers over it in a square-shaped neckline area and chest over lace, and it looked like exactly like the one that I was wearing, the heirloom. And now that they know that they've seen the same thing, her mom proceeds to tell the rest of the story, which is a lot creepier than what Jerica experienced. So this thing nudges her awake, and as soon as her mom looks at her, she's obviously floating horizontally. She just floats downwards, like she's facing up, but she's floating downwards. Just right when she was about to touch the floor, she stopped, and she looks up at her mom with this menacing grimace on her face. And then she just floats down the hallway like that on the floor towards Jerica's room. As they're both finishing talking about what happened to one another, her aunt, who was sleeping over, was like sleeping on the couch, comes rushing in the bedroom and is like, I gotta go. I'm never staying here again. They tried to get her to talk about what happened, but she refused to talk about it and just dipped. Jerica said that still to this day, her aunt actually won't talk about what happened to her. And her little sister woke up and went into the bathroom and also said, who was walking up and down the hallway last night when no one was doing that? So what did you guys think about this story? I think it's very interesting that Jerica had a not so scary experience. It was probably scary to her, but it sounds like the girl or the woman or her wasn't trying to scare her. It was trying to warn her. But it sounds like when she went to into her mom's room, that she was trying to scare her. So that is very confusing to me. So do you guys think this was a good entity? Do you think it was a bad entity? Do you think it was someone trying to warn her? Why did it scare her mom? I have so many questions, but I will tell you, the good part of the story is that Jerica is now in recovery from self-harm. She does not do it anymore. So great job, Jerica. That is amazing. I'm so glad that you stopped doing that. And anyone else who is suffering from self-harm, I truly hope that you get some help. You are not alone. I promise you there are so many resources, and I will drop them in the description. So those are my questions. So drop all your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions in the comments. But as always, please be respectful.
Would you play the most haunted, cursed game of all time? In 1991, an Australian company called Atmosphere released a board game, a video board game at that, called Nightmare, and it played on your deepest fears. It came in a black box and with a VHS tape that included a ticking clock and a figure called the Gatekeeper who counted down the seconds of the game. The gatekeeper would interrupt the ticking clock to address the players based on the color of their keys or by the figure they picked to play, a witch, a mummy. But some players claim that this game actually haunted them personally. They claim that the gatekeeper would speak through the screen and call them by name. Or worse, that after they played, the deepest fear that they had written down actually came true. Somebody wrote in with a story about playing this game and what happened to them after, but before we get into that, I'll play you a little clip I found of the gatekeeper.
So, you want to play the game? My game. By my rules. I am the gatekeeper. I rule this game. And you will obey my rules. You will be punished. I'd like to punish one of you now.
So when you started the game, you would start the tape, and mostly it was just a ticking clock, but sometimes the gatekeeper would interrupt to give instructions or shake the game up. The goal of the game was to race around the board and collect 6 keys before the gatekeeper could punish you. If you collected all 6 keys, then you got to draw someone else's deepest, darkest fear from the well of fears, and therefore your deepest, darkest fear would not come true. But what creeped people out wasn't the game itself. It was this legend that people who had played the game had heard the gatekeeper address them directly by name, by fear that they had written down. Some people claim that he would even show up in their dreams long after the game had been finished. The game was re-released in 2004, and to this day, there are still forums online where people talk about the creepy things that happen after playing this game. There are all kinds of fan communities and legends, but there are no verified reports that this game actually causes anything supernatural, obviously. But plenty of people have posted their own proof that the game is cursed, such as their VHS glitching, electronics around, like their TVs or their phones shutting off while playing this game. A girl named Casey said she found this game at a thrift store in her college town. She was about 21. She was with her best friend, and they decided to buy it because what else were they going to do? So they were not roommates, but they invited their respective roommates to come into one of their rooms to play this game that night. She said at that point they had not researched any of the lore around this game. They had absolutely no idea what it was. So they were reading the instructions as if they were gospel. Casey said that the instructions said that you had to write a legitimate fear, not like a jokey fear. You can't just be like, I'm afraid of losing Wi-Fi. You have to write what you're actually afraid of. And so deciding to play this game the right way, they all wrote down their respective fears and put them in the well of fear. They turned off all the lights and decided to play by candlelight. But Casey says when she dropped her fear into the well of fears, it felt like the energy in the room shifted. She swears it got colder. She said, in my mind, I guess I just thought it was something psychological about playing this creepy game. And so play started. The VHS timer counted down in blocky red numbers, and the gatekeeper interrupted periodically. It started out as cruel but funny. He would give petty rules, harmless banishment here and there. But she said the timing was off. He would pop up just as they started to relax. And she said when he disappeared, it was like he was still there watching. When the count had just passed 33 minutes, she said the gatekeeper did something that he hadn't done earlier in the game. He asked a question and then he waited. She said it didn't seem scripted. They all actually looked at each other like, are we supposed to answer? Is there somebody listening for us to answer? She said it was so eerie and it made us all hyper aware of the room, each other, and this VHS. And so they're all looking around waiting for this timer to click back on, and he's still just staring at them from the VHS tape. And then he screams, who hides more than one secret? And she said it scared her so bad that she actually knocked over the wine glass she was sitting next to. And Casey swears his expression changed and he shifted his eyes to look at her best friend Mara. She claims that he said, Mara, take your fear from the well. Casey and her 2 friends look at Mara and she is wide-eyed, her mouth is gaping open, and she's like, what do I do? And so one of the friends says, no, it must have been a glitch. We must have misheard it. And so she's like, I'll just rewind the tape because there's no way he said your name, because they're all like, how could this have happened? And as she's about to rewind it, the tape starts glitching and it just repeats, Mara, Mara, Mara. Her friend is fighting with this VCR trying to get the tape out, and then there was a metallic click and it shut off. They were all visibly shaken, and Casey flipped the lights on as Mara grabbed her fear out of the well of fears. She put it in her pocket. Casey and the 2 roommates were convinced that it was just a bad VCR or a bad VHS tape that had come with the game, but Mara was not convinced. And so Casey says, okay, look, we're going to look up this game. And Mara's like, what did you bring into the house? She says, we're going to look it up. Everything's going to be fine. And so they pull out their phones. They start trying to find information about this game, any lore around it, if the word Mara was actually in the VHS tape, because now it doesn't work at all. And they realize that all of their phones suddenly have 0 service. She said, we decided to go for a walk, and then we went to one of the bars just to get our minds off the whole thing. But nobody else at any of the bars that we encountered had any problems with their phone that night. After about an hour, they all had service again and everything seemed fine. But about 2 weeks later, Mara is MIA, and she said they did have a class together. So she noticed that she hadn't been responding to her texts and she didn't see her in class. So she calls her just to see if she's doing okay. She's not thinking that this is at all related to this game. So she's calling her and Mara is not picking up, and she's sending her texts, and she's going to Mara's roommate and she's like, hey, have you seen Mara? And She's like, no, she went home for the weekend. She told me she wasn't going to come back until Tuesday, which was the following day. So Tuesday comes, she still hasn't heard anything. She texts Mara again. Mara finally calls her. Casey's like, I was worried about you, you know, what's going on? And Mara says, there was an accident in my family. Luckily, everybody was okay, but there was a car accident and somebody she was close to was involved and they were in the hospital. Casey's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And before she can say anything else, like, do you need anything? What can I do for you? Mara whispers to her over the phone, that was my deepest fear, was losing this person. And so Casey's like, of course it is. Like, that's a horrible thing. I'm so happy that, you know, they're still okay. I'm sorry that they're in the hospital. And Mara interrupts her and she says, no, that was my deepest fear that I wrote down on the nightmare game. You know, when we heard my name being called? And Casey's like, Mara, I don't think this has anything to do with the game. I think this is just an unfortunate coincidence. And that's when Mara tells her that she's been seeing the gatekeeper in her dreams. Ever since they played that game, she says he comes to her every single night and he tells her your deepest fear is waiting. She tells Casey she's barely been able to sleep at all because it's creeped her out so much. But the strangest thing is the gatekeeper stopped visiting the night after the accident. It was like he was finally satisfied that the accident happened. Casey said luckily Mara's family member made a full recovery and nothing worse came of it. So that's so good to hear, but she swears this really happened. She says Mara has not seen the gatekeeper in her sleep, but she has also relied heavily on religion since this experience. She said Mara was not a previously religious person and it was basically like a 180 from the person that she used to be versus now. Casey said she prays constantly, and even though that this is not something that Casey practices, she said she still loves her as a friend and supports her in her decision, but she does fully believe that she turned to religion in order to get rid of the gatekeeper. She said the logical part of her brain wants to believe that this was just an unfortunate coincidence, because the logical part of her mind knows that there's nothing in the tape that could have known Mara's name or known her deepest fear, and she believes that the gatekeeper showing up in Mara's dreams was just psychological. Still though, she's talked about it at length with the other two girls who were there that night, and they all swear that they heard it say Mara's name. They've replayed the video online, they've watched it at length, and it never, not once, says the word Mara. She said, I have no explanation for that. I don't know how it happens, but one of the other girls thinks that that game allowed something else to come through, which then took hold of the game and targeted her for whatever reason. So what do you think? Unfortunate coincidence or something darker? Would you play the nightmare game?
This glitch in the Matrix story, 3 people can attest to. Creepy story time. This woman says that her mother always did all her GYN appointments with a specific doctor in downtown Austin. He was located on the 5th floor of this hospital building, and he had a long-term nurse/receptionist named Allison. She says she remembers always attending with her mother when she was little, and her mom would make fun little games out of it. They'd play games during finding the office and also being in the waiting room. She also remembers it being colorfully decorated with a forest scene on the walls. She said Allison was a really sweet woman too, and she always acted half like a babysitter during their visits. She remembers that when her and her brother were there, Allison would read them books, color with them, and even endure their horrible knock-knock jokes. They even had a little nickname for her. They called her Alice in Wonderland. So years down the road now, she is married and pregnant with a child, and she was starting to look around for an OB. So since she recently moved back to the Austin area, her mother suggested to go to that hospital and look for that doctor that she had when she was born. He was in his early 30s at the time, and just see if he's still in business. So first she looks online and she could not find this doctor's name anywhere in the hospital's directory. So she decides she's just going to swing by the office and check there. And her mother decided that she'd go with. During the trip there, they were reminiscing and joking about old times and how funny it is now that roles are reversed, and she's now coming as the patient and her mother's coming along for the ride. So as they get to the building, they realize there's a big problem. There is no 5th floor in this building. Odd, they thought, but maybe they both misremembered it. At least they knew it was on the very top floor. So it must just be the 4th floor, but nope, wrong, not there. They entertained the idea that maybe they were in the wrong building, but it could not be because they even parked in the exact same area in the exact same parking garage that they did years ago. And they walked that same familiar route, but that doctor did not exist at that hospital. And apparently, he never existed at all. She says her mother and brother are the only ones that remember him and Alice in Wonderland. They said they have asked around everywhere, including a lot of the hospital staff, and nobody remembers either of these two. They even went and looked at their birth certificates, which were new copies, and it just said attending physician on them. So she says, what, one of my childhood memories is fake, but it's remembered vividly by my brother and my mother. I love those kinds of stories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have your own creepy story time, I would love to hear it. Please share it with me using the email in my bio.
There's something really eerie about the desert in the Southwest. Now, I don't know if it's just the wide open vastness or how completely dark it is at night and the strange sounds that you will hear, or just how nothing is out there. You are completely alone in the desert, and you can drive for miles and miles and not see a thing. And this is something I think we should talk more about. The strange things that happen in the Southwest desert. Now, Carlos was from Tucson, and one night he decided with his friend that they were going to take a trip out to the Saguaro National Park. And they were going to go to this specific mountain where they would drive up to the top and they would look at the stars and see a meteor shower. So they got in their car and they drove about an hour. And they ended up on this desolate desert dirt highway. And as they're driving along, they come to this wash. And sitting in the wash next to the road is this blue tent. It has holes in it, it is tattered. It looks like it's been sitting there for a while. Well, Carlos's friend is like, we should pick that tent up. We shouldn't leave any garbage out in the desert. Like, we should clean it up. Carlos says, well, on our way back, we'll come back here and we'll pick up the tent and throw it away in the trash. So they continue on and they start going up this mountain drive. And as they get about halfway up, Carlos' friend starts kind of freaking out. And she's like, I don't think this is a good idea. Like, we should turn around. Something is not right. We should not go up on that mountain. And Carlos is like, no, we'll be fine. Everything's going to be okay. And she goes, no, listen, we need to turn around. So Carlos is like, okay, we'll go back down. There's a spot right where the base of the mountain is. We can see the stars and the meteor shower very well from there. So he begins to drive down this mountain. That's when all of a sudden they see something not too far ahead of them up on the road. It's an old man. He has very long hair. He has this sort of torn up poncho. And he's wearing sandals. And they said, he looked like he had been out in the desert for a while. And he was just standing on the side of the road. So they slowly pass this guy. He doesn't look, he doesn't move, he doesn't turn, he doesn't do anything. And they just keep on going. And they're a little freaked out by this, but, they figure it's just maybe some homeless guy. They get away about 20, 30 seconds ahead of him. And all of a sudden, the car starts puttering. And then the engine stalls. And the car will not start. So Carlos says to his friend, I think it has something to do with the battery cable. I'm going to hop out and check it. So he gets out of the car and he pops the hood and he starts, looking at the battery. All of a sudden, he hears the sounds of footsteps. And they're coming up behind the vehicle. They get a little louder and a little louder. So finally, Carlos shuts the hood and he looks around and he's like, hello? Hello? And then he sees that man. And he's just standing there about 15 feet away from the car. And so Carlos walks up to him and is like, we're having some car trouble. Like, I'm sorry if this is your property. Like, we're trying to leave. And the guy doesn't say anything. And he's like, are you okay, sir? Like, do you need help? Once again, he doesn't say anything. Then this man points up to the top of the mountain that they were going to drive up. And he goes, he kind of has this raspy hum, and he's pointing at the mountain. And Carlos is like, yeah, we were, going to go up to the top of the mountain, but we decided to turn around. So that's when all of a sudden this man kind of lifted his face, and he could see his eyes were not human. They were bright and glowing yellow. So all of a sudden, this man let out a scream. Carlos ran, jumped in the car, and he begins trying to turn over the ignition. Finally, he gets the car to start, and they drive off. And Carlos is telling his friend, like, something was off with that man, like, we need to get out of here. So they get back down to that wash where the tent was. And the tent's, still there. And his friend's like, look, you need to pick up the tent. It's really important. Like, we can't leave trash out in the desert. It's like a bad thing to do. So he's like, okay, I'll get it, but I'm going to be like 2 minutes. Just stay in the car. So he parks the car, and he gets out, and he walks over to the tent. As he gets within about 5 feet of this tent, he could see something moving. And there's, like a little hole in the tent. He could see through there. And as he slowly peeked into the tent, he sees a body. But not just any body, his body. And this body that looks exactly like him is completely mangled, like something had attacked it. So he ran, he jumps back in the car, and he drives off. And he's like, I'm not getting the tent, like something is wrong. We need to get out of here. And he said he still thinks about, to this day, what would have happened if they went on top of that mountain. Now, the Southwest is also known for UFO sightings. It is a hot spot, especially in the Sedona area. Some people consider this a very spiritual place with portals leading to other dimensions, and a lot of UFO activity happens in and around Sedona. Well, this story comes out of that area. There was this man driving one night. He had 3 of his friends with him. And he said they were just going down this 2-lane highway. And he said he just remembered it was very open. The sun had just went down, and they could see the mountains off in the distance. Well, all of a sudden, it got very bright, and it almost felt like it was daytime. And that's when they noticed this bright light coming up over the horizon, almost like the sun was coming up. And they said, what is that? Like, it's nighttime. Like, that can't be the sun. What is that light? And this light slowly rose up, and it started to move over the desert. And next thing they knew, this light flew over the top of their vehicle. And it was almost like they went into a trance. And the next thing they know, they are now in the middle of the desert on this dirt road. Their car's parked, and none of them have any idea how they got there. So they're kind of talking amongst themselves, like, what just happened? Like, did that light have something to do with this? Like, what is going on? When all of a sudden, they see a series of lights off in the distance. They look like flashlights. And that's when some figures start to come into their eyesight. And they notice there are probably about 6 or 7 what look like people walking towards their vehicle. And they finally get up really close to where they can actually make out who or what these people are. And they said there were like 6 or 7 men. They were wearing black suits. They had no eyebrows, no hair on their head. They were completely bald. And it almost appeared as if their nose was sunken into their face. And he said one of them walks up to the window, and he just remembered rolling down the window and asking the guy, like, what's going on? The guy said, you've been in an accident, but everything's okay. You're going to be all right. Don't worry. So we just need to check on one of your friends. And he's like, why? Why, is something wrong with him? He said, no, we need to check on him. So he said these 6 men, they go to the other side of the vehicle. They come over to the car door where his friend's sitting. They open his door and they sort of just look at him. And they kind of inspect him. Then he said, they told him, you can go. Like, everything's all right. Just go up the road. This is how you get back to the highway. And they took off. And they headed out into the desert. And they disappeared. So he got back in the car and they drove off. And they found the highway. They ended up home. Well, 3 weeks later, that very friend that they had examined was in a plane accident and passed away. And he always felt like it was connected to the experience they had that night.
Something was counting as I slept. I've always had trouble sleeping. Most nights I wake up around midnight, fall back asleep quickly, but it's enough to ruin my mornings. Always tired, always foggy. So I downloaded one of those sleep tracking apps. Records you through the night. Snoring, movement, stuff like that. Set it up beside my bed, plugged in my phone, drifted off. Like usual, I woke up around midnight. I heard the bed creak, like something had climbed onto it. It's an old frame, so I ignored it, went back to sleep. In the morning, I checked the app. It doesn't save full recording, it's just the moments with the sound spikes. I tapped the first one. The same creak I remembered. The rustle of fabric. Weight settling beside me. I listened, frozen. Then came a voice. 74, 75, 76. It kept counting until it faded away. My chest tightened. I searched my apartment, doors locked, windows sealed, everything untouched. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone tampered with the file. I tried to convince myself of that. That night, I set the phone up again. I lay down, shut my eyes, and drift off. Sometime after midnight, I woke. Not to a sound this time. To the feeling of breath on the back of my neck. Warm. Slow. I didn't move. The air around me felt still, heavy. Every hair on my body stood on end. I stayed still, pretending to sleep, until I finally threw the blanket off. I stood up, reached for the lamp. The chain clicked, light flooded the room, and I saw a depression in the mattress lift, like something invisible had just gotten up and vanished. My phone buzzed. Another recording. I hit play with shaking hands. The familiar creak. The sheets shifting the sound of something lying down beside me. Then a woman's voice, soft, calm, almost tender, whispered into the mic right next to my head. 75, 76, 77. You stopped breathing. The recording ended. I deleted the app. Not that it mattered. Because I still wake up around midnight to the sound of my bed creaking and the feeling of breath on the back of my neck.
So in Williams, California, there is a road called Lone Star that many locals believe is haunted. And there have been reports of people having accidents because they see a woman in the back of their car and they get startled, I guess, because they don't know where this woman came from. And many have crashed. And in general, that road has claimed many lives. But for me to get to my warehouse job, I had to go through this road. So there was a night where I was driving to get to my graveyard shift, and it was just like any other regular night. I was playing my radio, not really thinking of much, and I ended up looking in the rearview mirror because I wanted to be cautious of my surroundings, and I might have been speeding a bit. So when I look into my mirror, I noticed that there is a shadow all the way in the third row. So it freaks me out a bit because that night the power had went out in the apartments we're staying at, and my first thought was like, somebody must have gotten into my truck, and now I'm carrying this person that's about to get rid of me while I'm driving. So I'm driving and I look again, and this time I see it in the second row. And by this time I'm freaking out a bit, but I'm trying to dial on my phone because since I'm so scared, I can't, like the numbers are just not going through. And I end up flipping the mirror up so that I don't even get tempted to look back, right? So by this point I'm starting to get even more freaked out, and I'm trying to turn up the radio, trying to distract my mind. I'm just trying to get to work. Work is only like 2 minutes more, but I'm so scared that it seems like eternity. So I end up feeling this thing breathing literally like on the side of me. Maybe it's my imagination, I don't know, playing tricks on me, but I feel it right next to me. And by this point I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to leave this earth any second. Like, this thing is going to do something to me, and I'm just, it's gonna be over right now. And so I'm finally about to make it out of that road. So I hit the curb, and now I'm only like 40 seconds away, but I still feel its presence there. So I'm still terrified, and I'm still thinking the worst. I end up making it to work, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, why do you look so scared? You're so white, you're so pale. And I'm like, oh, nothing's wrong, but I'm so terrified. I just don't want to bring up the encounter again. And so later that night or early morning, the security officer goes over up to me, and he's like, hey, I just want to check on you, make sure everything's all right. And I'm like, yeah, why, what's up? And he's like, no, well, it's just because when you got here, I saw you were racing into the parking lot, and I was kind of concerned because you were driving so fast. He said, but when I was looking at you on the cameras, he said, as soon as you got off your car, he said, this shadow followed right behind you. And I nearly crapped my pants because I thought, okay, this thing was in my car and now it followed me into the warehouse. So after that, I did tell like everybody what had happened, and everybody began to tell me their stories about other people that have experienced the same thing and how they don't know who exactly that person is, or if they might have, you know, passed away on the road or had an accident. I would still drive to that road because I had to, but I would avoid looking in the rearview mirror as much as possible. I wouldn't even like turn it up so I wouldn't get tempted. I didn't see anything after that again, but that one time was enough for me.
If you really want to lose sleep, I dare you to look up the Lake Annecy shootings. Because in 2012, 3 members of the same family and 1 random person riding their bike were all shot and killed at a remote rest stop in France. They were all shot multiple times in the head, execution style, with a plunging fire technique, which is when shots are fired from above, descending at a steep angle. So it was swift, precise, and nearly impossible to escape. This is a technique often used by intelligence services such as the DGSE, France's Foreign Intelligence Agency. This case is super unsettling and honestly bizarre because so many people seem to have a motive to kill all of these victims, and the target could have been any single one of them, or nobody at all. Like, they all had questionable things going on in their lives that could have made them the target, or this could have been completely random. Nobody knows. This is the mysterious case of the Lake Annecy shootings. It is still unsolved, and something that may be connected to another unsolved shooting that took place 1 year prior with eerie similarities. But whoever did this has never been caught, is still out there, and could strike again, so let's talk about it. This is 50-year-old Saad al-Hili and his wife Iqbal. Together they had 2 beautiful children, Zina, who was 4 years old when this took place, and the other, Zainab, who was 7. They lived in Claygate, Surrey, and they all loved caravanning and cycling together as a family. Neighbors described Saad as a loving family man who adored his 2 little girls, and he was a really smart engineer. He was working on a project for European Aeronautic Defense and Space, aka EADS. Saad was born in Iraq, but he moved to the UK with his family in 1971, and from there he built a really beautiful life. This brings us to September 5th, 2012. Saad and his family, including his mother-in-law Suhaila, were out camping around and visiting Chevelin, France, and their trip started out great. But by nightfall, 3 of them would be dead. At around 3:45 p.m., the family decided to make a quick stop at a rest area near Lake Annecy. It was a really mountainous, remote rest stop and stretch of road, and they only planned to stay for a second before heading back out. But within a matter of 90 seconds, the unthinkable would happen. Nobody would know what took place until a few minutes later when a nearby cyclist stumbled across a horrifying scene. Laying off to the side of the road was another bicyclist. His name was Sylvain Molière, and he was a 45-year-old father of 3 who was just out on a joyride by himself. He had been shot 7 times, most of which were in the head, and he was clearly deceased. This was obviously enough to shock him, but as he looked up, 7-year-old Zainab was stumbling towards him in the middle of the road. She had been shot in the shoulder and suffered from severe head trauma. The cyclist helped her as best as he could, but then he came across her family's car, which was locked but still running. In fact, the car was still in the reverse gear, so the back tires were spinning out of control in the loose sand. As he looked closer, he found 3 more bodies inside the car: Saad, his wife Iqbal, and her mom Suhaila. They'd all been shot twice, execution style in the head, and they were also deceased. So needless to say, the police were quickly called, and then they discovered an even more bizarre scene. 3 members of the same family and 1 random man were all gunned down. 7-year-old Zainab was taken to the hospital where she luckily survived the attack, but seemingly missing from the scene was her 4-year-old little sister, Zina. Unbeknownst to authorities, Zina was uninjured, and for 8 hours after the shooting, she'd been hiding underneath her dead mom's legs under the seat. She was there and hiding even while the police were on the scene investigating, and she wasn't discovered until special forensic investigators arrived and examined the car. And this is so heartbreaking to think about her just hiding there at 4 years old, knowing that her whole family was just killed. So as they were investigating the scene, police found that in total, 25 shots were fired, and the killer used a special pre-World War II Luger P06 semi-automatic pistol, and they weren't just shot in the head. All 4 of the victims suffered close-range headshots, execution style. Ballistics experts also noted the use of plunging fire techniques. Plunging fire refers to a shooting technique where bullets are fired from an elevated position, like a slope, hill, or higher ground, so that they descend sharply onto onto the targets below. So this means that the gunfire didn't come head on. It rained down from a higher point, precise and coldly calculated, as if the victims were being hunted from above. This was a huge red flag and meant that the killer had advanced skill, and they were able to maintain composure under extreme stress. More specifically, because of how precise these execution-style wounds were, investigators believe the killer likely had some sort of military background, and because a precise collector-grade firearm was used. The plunging fire technique is not typically taught in standard military training in France, but it is used by elite units and intelligence services such as the DGSE. This type of technique is also linked to Swiss special forces and private tactical schools in Switzerland, many of which offer courses known as the Assassin Course. Forensic evidence shows that either as Saad was being shot at or shortly after, he tried putting the car in reverse and backing away before dying behind the wheel. DNA was also found at the scene, including one fingerprint and a couple of cigarette butts, as well as part of the weapon that had fallen off. Even with this evidence left behind though, finding whoever did this proved to be difficult. There was only one eyewitness, who was the bicyclist who found the bodies, and he reportedly heard no gunshots. The only thing he remembers seeing is a gray BMW and a motorcycle nearby at the time of the murders. The cyclist gave a description of the motorcyclist, who had a goatee and was wearing an unusual helmet. Other than this, no other evidence was left behind, and it was like whoever did this just vanished into thin air. So investigators started looking into everyone's past to try and find out, one, who the target actually was, and two, what the motive could possibly be. So they started with Saad. Police believe that he could have been targeted for the project that he was working on for EADS, which is the European Aerospace Corporation I mentioned earlier. Investigators also found that Saad used to work at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, which is one of the national scientific research laboratories in the UK. Right before he was killed, Saad went to a bank in Geneva, and some leaked reports state that he possibly had access to Saddam Hussein's bank accounts. Police then looked into the possibility that this was a contract kill carried out due to some financial issues within the family. And just a year after the murders, Saad's brother was actually brought in for questioning regarding this case. Police initially believed that he could have been involved because he tried to create a false will for their dad, and he tried to withdraw over $2 million from his bank account in Switzerland. His brother denied having anything to do with the murders and begged to take a polygraph test, and after a thorough investigation, police cleared him as a suspect. And what ultimately made them rule out that this was a contract kill was how old the weapon that was used was. No professional hitman would use such a vintage gun like this. So although there were some pretty big motives that Saad was the target, police couldn't prove it. So then they moved on to the next person, which was Sylvan. Since Sylvan was the odd man out and had no connection to the Al-Hali family, they were really interested in getting to know his background to see if he was possibly the target instead. Sylvan was a local father of three who worked as a welder in a workshop at a subsidiary of Arriva, which is a French company that specializes in nuclear power. Police say that it's not likely that he was exposed to some big nuclear secrets that nobody wanted getting out, but they can't rule this out as a possibility. The next theory that police had was that this could have been carried out by a lone psychopath. So 1 month after the murders, some confidential police files were leaked to a local newspaper. In those files, police stated that they believed these killings were carried out by a lone and psychologically disturbed killer. Their reasoning was that the killer, again, used such an old pre-World War II weapon that they felt that this person definitely had some extensive training. But at this point, they didn't believe that this was a professional assassin. A local ex-policeman was later thought to be the killer as he resembled the composite sketch of the motorcycle man with the goatee and weird helmet. As police were searching his home, they found several similar vintage guns, but they were able to compare his DNA to what was left behind at the crime scene, and it didn't match, so he was released. And then shortly after this, the real motorcycle witness that was spotted near the crime scene that day was actually tracked down, but police believe that he was just an innocent passerby. The last two people that I'm going to mention probably make the most sense. One is Patrice Menegaldo, an ex-French Foreign Legion soldier from Eugene. Patrice was actually interviewed back when the murders first took place because he had a 7-year affair with Sylvan's sister, and he actually knew Sylvan's partner. But at the time of that interview, police didn't suspect him at all. Shortly after he was interviewed, Patrice took his own life because he felt like the police thought he was a suspect. In reality, they only looked at him as a suspect because he took his own life over it. Honestly, no one thought he was involved until he died at the hands of himself. And lastly, some think that Nordani Leilande could be involved. Nordani is a suspected serial killer and a 34-year-old ex-soldier at the time of the crime. He killed an 8-year-old little girl at a wedding where he was a guest, and not long after, a soldier named Arthur was killed in the same area. Arthur had been hitchhiking, and no one knew who killed him time until police started investigating Nordani for the murder of the 8-year-old little girl. Then police found that his phone had pinged in the same area where Arthur's body would eventually be found. And adding more fuel to the fire was the fact that Nordani's car was seen in the same area on CCTV. Investigators then found that he looked up decomposition of a human body on the internet after they were both killed. So because of all of this, some think that he could have been involved in the Lake Annecy shootings, but no physical evidence ever tied him to the crime. Over the years, so many people have been arrested for this, but then later released because police can't find any concrete evidence, which is sad. And as of today, this case remains unsolved. In 2020, a forensic psychologist put together a psychological profile of the Lake Annecy killer. From that report, the shooter is believed to be around 30 to 40 years old, is either unemployed or has a low-paying job, lives alone, and is accustomed to failure. They likely have a prior criminal record and maybe even exhibited signs of a personality disorder from a young age. They were possibly abused as a child and maybe even suffered a head injury during early development, and they have a 50% chance of having previously served in the military. So authorities are hoping that with this new profile, they can start to narrow down some suspects. Also in 2020, police gave the All Holly daughters a journal for them to try and write down any potential flashbacks or memories they may get from that fateful day. And this actually seemed to work, because Zainab wrote down that she remembers pacing back and forth around her mom and dad's car that day, while her parents yelled at her to get back in the car. She continued to write how she remembers being grabbed by a bald man with fair skin, blue eyes, and severely bitten fingernails. The man was wearing leather pants and a leather blouse jacket that's seen a lot of times in military clothing and uniforms. The man then shot her in the shoulder and would have continued shooting her, but the pistol jammed. So that's when he started beating her in the head with it, causing the trauma. She then lost consciousness, and the next thing she knew, she was in a hospital bed. Since the weapon was never found, ballistic analysis has really helped narrow down the search, and it's honestly the primary focus of the investigation. Investigators believe that the killer has specialized military training, and because of how accurate the execution-style wounds were, they believe that the killer is a Swiss soldier in his 50s, or at least was at the time of the murders. Some evidence even suggests that the killer may have opened the car door, leaned in, and started firing. So many agencies have teamed up to try and solve this case, but so far they have zero leads. A lot of people think this case could be connected to the 2011 unsolved murder of Xavier Bolland. Xavier was 29 years old when he was shot and killed at a rest stop near Malbo. He'd only stopped there for just a few seconds as he was coming back from vacation, and he had his 2 little kids sleeping in the back seat. He was shot 5 times, including a final plunging fire headshot, which is eerily similar to the Lake Annecy case. Unfortunately, there were no eyewitnesses or CCTV in this case, so it remains unsolved as well. But that's not the only similarity between the 2 cases. Xavier was killed with a Swiss military weapon from the 1950s, similar to the one in the Lake Annecy case. They both took place in remote rest areas, both had a lack of clear motive, and both of them involved the use of precise, collector-grade firearms. To me, that sounds almost identical, which is really unsettling. As of today, police say they have no working theory to explain the murderers or any suspects. Maybe they were all just killed randomly, or maybe they were all a target in some form or another. I mean, it is crazy that so many people had some sort of motive to kill any of these victims, and the target could have been any one of them, or nobody at all, and this really was just random. This is one of those cases that honestly made me lose sleep after reading about it. I just keep imagining the sheer terror that they all must have felt, and for someone to commit a crime like this, so cold and calculated, yet escape and never be found, it's incredibly disturbing. But it's now been 13 years, and why all of these people died under eerily similar circumstances remains a mystery, and whoever did this is still out there.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Robin Montgomery posted this scary clip to Facebook. She was simply filming to show how moms can't even get a break to go potty when she caught this. Took this video of my 1-year-old daughter. It was meant to be for a funny post about how moms can't even go to the bathroom alone. Here it is 4 years later and it still haunts me. Nobody but her and I were in the house. And no, she doesn't have makeup on. Tell me what you see. Look at the face right there.
Favorite? Ouch! Ouch!
It sounds like she's saying ouch. First of all, why does her face look like that? But second, I had to zoom in and we're gonna watch together. Why does her face look like that?
They ring.
Wait, it almost looks like she was pulled.
Ouch.
How did her hands slide like that? What the fuck? No. That was fucking creepy. So creepy. At some point, it almost looked like something pulled her, because how did she make her hands look like that? Like both of her hands pulled away from the door. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments.
We really glazed over how insanely bonkers it is that a place like Epstein's Island even existed. But what most people don't know is that it wasn't the first of its kind. Decades earlier, in the middle of Lake Michigan, a desolate island owned by a wealthy Detroit socialite became the subject of all sorts of wild conspiracy theories. And at first, a conspiracy theory is exactly what most people thought it was. While on the surface, it was just a summer camp for young boys, teaching them survivalist skills in nature, behind the scenes, these children were being flown to this island to be exploited, filmed, and traded among the men who sponsored the island's operations. The owner of North Fox Island, a man named Frank Sheldon, had purchased the land specifically for this purpose. As a matter of fact, the very first thing he did was built an airstrip on the island as a means to shuttle boys in and out. One of the men who sponsored the island was a former school teacher named Gerald Richards. He and Sheldon ran a nonprofit called Brother Paul's Children Mission. The organization was supposed to help underprivileged youth connect with nature, but upon their plane touching down on the landing strip, the boys would soon realize that that wasn't going to be the case. Now, it's a lot to get into, so much so that we had to make our podcast episode about this in 2 parts, because the owner of the island would eventually flee the country, making it extremely difficult to charge him with any involvement. The story disappeared from the news fairly quickly and was just dismissed as an urban legend. But North Fox Island was just a tiny piece in a much larger picture of child trafficking rings happening around the world. It wouldn't be until the early 2000s that more people began examining the evidence themselves, realizing just how extensive this operation truly was. North Fox Island has also been tied to a series of unsolved child murders committed by an unknown perpetrator known only as the Oakland County Child Killer. It's an awful lot to dive into, but if you're interested, you can check out my 2-part episode on this topic, or I can make a part 2 here.
The case of Travis the Chimp had to be one of the saddest and insane cases ever. Let's talk about it. So this is Travis the Chimp. He was literally not your typical animal. This man could drive. He could literally mow the yards. He was literally like a neighborhood hero. Like everybody literally loved this chimp. He was a part of the community. Now, he was born in 1995 and was purchased by this woman named Sandra, and he was taken from his mother when he was literally just 3 years old. And not to mention, this chimp was 200 pounds. This was a big animal to just be having, chilling in your living room, watching TV. He literally would watch TV and turn the channels with the remote and go to the grocery store in the car. He had a license. Yeah. And so one day he just snapped and got super aggressive to his owner. And that's when she called her friend over and he literally mauled his face off. This lady had to get so many different surgeries and implants. And literally, I believe she got a whole face implant because of this. It's luckily she's still alive and she shared her story and the experience. And the police came and they, put Travis down. And it's a sad case because at the end of the day, this is a wild animal that needs to be in the wild. This was not a pet. It's sad that he did that to this, poor woman that was just trying to come over and help her friend. But it's another case of this is a wild animal. People need to stop making these wild, thinking these things is just so cute and fun. At the end of the day, you don't ever know when these animals could snap. And it's not a bad thing. They're meant to be in a wild. They're meant to be in the wild. Like, not to be your pets and to be watching baseball. That was his favorite show. Why do he love watching baseball? He's not supposed to know what baseball is. But yeah, this case was so crazy. Like, this was all over the news back in the day. Like, there are so many documentaries. This poor woman, she lived a long time. I believe she's still alive, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm happy that she survived this situation. Like, everything was mauled off of her, y'all. It was insane. But yeah, you won't catch me getting no type of exotic animals. Cats and dogs is what I will stick with. But let me know if y'all ever heard of this case and what y'all think about this.
Weird Spooky Casa de Fruta. So I just posted a story about Casa de Fruta where someone had messaged me who had seen one of my stories from back in March and was said, hey, this story really happened because I know that guy that it happened to. So here's this person's story. This comes from the Kinda Funny Kid. I worked there for a few months at the sweets shop and closed, and there were 2 times where weird stuff happened. We got done with everything early and we were just chilling. All of a sudden, we hear our little motion sensor go off and a woman talking. See, the woman is a thing. It's like you gotta be initiated in by hearing her. We look at the door and no one was there. Not too spooky, but the same thing happened again a month later. Finished early and heard a woman speaking. But this time, that wasn't all. We got to the very end, turned out the lights, and me and my coworker heard music, even though we turned it off. Thought that was weird, right? Well, right after we hear our pastry case slam open and hit the wall. I ran so fast out of the store, it is so haunted. I have so many more stories from that place though. Then I started asking him a few questions about the previous story that he was vouching for, and he was like, no, like that really happened. It really scared the guy. He's such a nice guy. You know, it's too bad that happened to him. And then he remembered another story. He said this one was around November, and I'm going to call his coworker Amber for her privacy. He said that she was closing, and then all of a sudden they were going to close the door, and they heard that woman's voice again. I guess they used to have a suggestion box on the counter, and it was like super heavy, and it flew off the counter. They said that the story of this white woman and all the poltergeists at Casa de Fruta are so widespread that even the groundskeepers talk about it. My mom used to work at Casa de Fruta, and now I have so many questions for her. Let me know in the comments if you ever worked at Casa de Fruta and experienced anything, or if you've heard any stories that I didn't mention.